Welcome to the What is God podcast. I'm Shifra Bloom, your hostess, and I'm here today with Leif Droms. Leif is one of my favorite people to talk to. He is a self-identifying Jewish atheist agnostic, and we have had some of the most fascinating, interesting, lively conversations. So I'm really excited to get to record one of those conversations with him today. Leif has been running a clubhouse group what's it called, Leif?
So for people that aren't familiar, Clubhouse is the social media app that became very popular during the pandemic, and it has audio only chat rooms on it. And we started on every Friday night doing Torah reading, and we called it Atheist Jews drinking and reading Torah on Shabbat. Went through the cycle, finished the Torah, or one complete reading of it, and then we moved to Thursday nights so that the people that were more religious, for those that don't know, religiously observant Jews will not use their phone after sundown on Friday, et cetera, et cetera. Electricity, they won't change or turn a light bulb on and off, et cetera, et cetera.
We'll go more into it too. I just wanted to give the
Perfect.
introduction because it's just really a very unique thing of, okay, a bunch of, atheist, agnostic Jews who hold at varying levels of religious observance, which is interesting. And we want to talk about that because usually we think of like religion and atheism or agnosticism as being at odds with one another. But what I'm hearing is that they might not always have to be. And then we have them all getting together at first on, the Sabbath, then not on the Sabbath, when you're going to just have some drinks and study the Torah. And I think it's fascinating. And now I know that Leif has just started a website called atheistagnosticjews.com. Which I'm really excited about. I remember I met Leif at a Shabbat dinner, at a Friday night dinner, and then I became friends with him and his wife from there. But I remember several weeks back now, probably a couple months ago now, having a phone call with you and encouraging you, like, man, you gotta have a mailing list, like, because I forget if you were just sharing something with me or if you showed me a piece of your writing or what it was, but I knew that I wanted to be on that mailing list because I think, and I'll conclude this intro with a little quote, which is that I don't know if I'm going to paraphrase it or even where this quote come from, but essentially I feel like it's true with me and Leif, is that the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either.
Yeah.
Seems to be the conclusion. Yeah.
Yep.
And I say that as someone who does believe in what I call God, right? Which you can listen to my podcast on what God is to me. And I do believe in God or call myself a believer in that way. And you call yourself an atheist or agnostic. And yet what's so interesting that I'm excited to dive into is that while there are differences in how we hold or how we believe, it's actually, there might not really be that many differences.
There's not. It's we're staring at the same glass. You're looking at it at a half full. I'm looking at it half empty, or vice versa, or whatever. We're looking at the same sunset, and you're having different thoughts about it, but we're still looking at the same sunset, and that's just called being a Jew. To be honest, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. So okay. So that's my introduction of Leif. You can tell this is just the introduction and we're already going off on tangents because there's so much here. I'm Shifra Bloom, your hostess. This is the What is God podcast. And Leif, I have a question for you. Are you ready?
Yes.
Leif, I would love to know how you would answer the question, what and where is God and what does it have to do with me?
Sure. So to give a little bit of background, I call myself an atheist agnostic Jew. My viewpoint, it operates on a spectrum. About 95% of the time, I'm like, hey, I don't know if there's a higher power or not, or believe in one, etc. Show me the data. Show me the output from your particle accelerator experiment. Show me this. Math is okay too, because math doesn't rely on data. Show me the data. Show me the numbers. Show me the math, etc. If you can get that together and prove to me that there's a God as most people think of a God, I'm game. Sounds great. Sounds like a great time. That's about 95% of the time where I act in, and or where my brain resides in. And then every once in a while, I feel like there's absolutely some mythical force out there. And sometimes I feel absolutely the other way, the other direction, where there's nothing there. You're on your own. That's how it is. Get on with your life. And
Yeah.
a lot of it was coming to terms with there's no rules as far as that go. And I felt pressure pretty much my entire life. Like, you have to state your belief in this, or you have to state your belief in this, and you have to stand by it, and you have to define your belief based on how other people define their beliefs, which is a is this a clean podcast? I forgot that we didn't go over the rules.
Well, there is now a language warning. Okay, please continue.
Oh, all right. I can keep it clean. I just need to know the rules.
Uh,
um,
you know what? Be authentic. We just warned people, and now I think I lean towards keeping it clean, but that's just how I speak, and that's my authentic way of expression. So you be you.
it's fine. I can clean it up a little bit for a day.
Okay.
I realize that's a load of nonsense. There we go. I was looking for the radio.
You had to look
Um,
for it, but we found it.
it was hiding in the blurred closet behind me. Um, yeah, it's a load of nonsense. There's absolutely no rules, and people are going to look at you funny about it, and that's just life. I don't know how things are in different cultures, as you can tell by my accent. I grew up in America, and so did Chifra, as far as I know, and we have that mentality where, like, what is your definition of yourself? Blah 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 blah. How does it stack up against mine? Blah blah blah. Like, is this valid or invalid? Are we friends or like? It's just nonsense.
Mhm.
You don't owe anybody anything,
Mm.
and that sounds like so basic and self-helpy and so on and so forth. But then why did I spend about 20 years of my life thinking that? And why do I know so many people that are just so resolute? Like, no, I have to fall into this category of hard atheist, blah, 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 blah. And anything that falls under the, quote, religion category is garbage because it's not reason,
Yeah.
or et cetera. Or they go in the other way and they say that, yes, despite overwhelming, conclusive scientific evidence, we're pretty sure that evolutionary biology exists.
Wait, what?
We're pretty sure that evolutionary biology exists,
Uh-huh.
meaning biology adapts to selective pressures, and we call this evolution.
Yeah. Well, you know what?
We can observe it happening in front of us with bacteria multiplying very quickly.
Everything you're saying, what it's making me think of right now is that no matter what a person believes, there will be people who disagree with them and think that whatever it is that they believe is absolutely absurd and ridiculous, no matter. Another thing that comes is like that it's okay for your beliefs to evolve and shift and change and not be static and fixed. It's okay because, and this is part of my relationship to that which we call God, it's a personal relationship. It's your relationship. It's your definition. It's your belief. And that can change. And the truth is that even amongst I think there is an element of tribalism and like a need and a desire in a human being to be part of a group. It's also easy to get swept up in the group think, in the group mentality, and be like, wait, what do I actually believe? So it's a great exploration. But uh, it seems to me that there are as many different definitions of God as there are people, and that even within, let's say, because you and I met in a Jewish setting, even within a Jewish setting or within whatever, like a setting where everyone's of the same religion and they're going to the same kind of house of prayer and they're doing the same things, even within there, you're going to have a wide array and spectrum of what people believe. Even people who believe the same things, if you really dig down into it, you're going to realize, oh wow, these are actually not exactly the same, because it's such a unique and individual thing. Does that land for you?
I can't comment on other cultures because I've only ever been Jewish my whole life.
Sure.
But at least in the Jewish culture, very much so. And I'm going to say something a little controversial. I actually think having like this idea, and you mentioned personal God, but I think we're talking a different inflection of the term. When I think of personal God, I think of versus like something like Spinoza's writing, which I only know the rough edges of, and panentheism, where like God is the universe, et cetera, et cetera. Personal God is like there is a God, I can talk to him or her, and it's usually a him, in these situations. And they have a human-like personality. They intercede in human affairs.
Mm.
So that kind of a God, I'm not really big on.
Yeah, say more.
They there's plenty of people are, but that was actually a really big stumbling block for me for so long. Is that uh, for those that aren't aware, one of the core prayers in Judaism is the Shema prayer. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one.
Mm.
And I interpret that in my 12-year-old mind as the most basic English inflection. Whereas, like when you start getting into the Jewish culture and the Hebrew and the biblical Hebrew, which is different from modern Hebrew, and et cetera, et cetera, um, it can really be very, very quite abstract. And as an adult, I was shocked to talk to clergy members, rabbis, cantors, et cetera, that I assumed for so long would have a completely personal God viewpoint of God, and they're just like, nope. Nope, doesn't have to be. In fact, I'm not that way. I'm like, well, why didn't anybody tell me this when I was 12? I would have stayed with my culture.
So interesting. Well, and now that you say that, I'd love for you to share a little more of your journey because, I'm hoping in this conversation to hear a little bit of your journey from being
Sure.
a young boy in a Jewish culture to atheism to now, where you're at now and how you got there. And then I'm also hoping that we can even get a little deeper and see how our beliefs aren't actually that different after all. And I think those two things, and I think hearing your journey, I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be able to relate. So yeah, please share with us.
Sure. So really, it came down to in Jewish culture, at least American Jewish culture, because in Israel you grew up speaking Hebrew and you don't have to go to a specific class once a week. Um, we have usually for school kids, usually a Sunday school, which tends to be more cultural, religious education, quote unquote. And then there's usually like a 1 day a week where you study Hebrew, the language, and how to read and write it, and
See, I went
etc.
to day school. I didn't do that. So it's interesting.
I went to day school for a couple of years, but then of course it all went away, and then there were plenty of kids at the synagogue that were preparing for bar and bat mitzvahs that had not gone to day school; they'd gone to public school the entire time. So
Mhm.
I was sitting there in Wednesday night Hebrew school. We were doing an assignment, and the prompt was, "Do you believe in?" or sorry, "Why do you believe in God?" Like it didn't even give you an opt out of like, "Do you? Yes or no?" Which is kind of messed up to think about. But hey, look, it was the '90s and people were less sensitive, I guess. I don't know. It
Mhm.
said, "Do you believe?" or "Why do you believe in God?" And then in parentheses it said, "And you can't just say because your parents told you so." And I sat there holding my pencil for the 5 minute prompt, and I'm just like scared.
Mm.
I realized that is the reason. Holy smoke! Well, what do I write? Because I don't want to be disruptive. I want to write something down. So I came up with something. Obviously, I didn't say this as a 12-year-old, so I'm paraphrasing. This was 20 some years ago. But due to the compassion in the hearts of people in their best moments, or whatever, I don't know.
You made something up to please the teacher.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah, to please my childhood rabbi,
Yeah.
who was great guy. And then, like that was fine. And then I just thought about it. I'm like, uh-oh, what do I do? And I studied for my bar mitzvah, and I went through with it the next year. And then I just kind of faded away. And then around that time, I found the word agnostic as a vocabulary word. I'm like, oh, well, that's me. That's it. And since I don't resolutely believe in a personal God, how can I pay the price of admission of participating in my culture? Obviously, I can't. So I didn't, and I stayed away for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that time period, I mean, looking back on it, punk rock and the punk scene, and going to basement shows in the middle of nowhere, and so on and so forth, that had taken the place of culture and religion and peoplehood for me. And yeah, we can touch on that a little bit. But
Please,
yeah,
if you now or later, I mean, you did.
sure.
So I'll say, I want to bring up, you sent me something before we hopped on the podcast
Yep.
about a week ago, and I would love for you to share what it was that you sent me and why you sent it to me in prep for this podcast.
Sure. So I sent you for a song by a band called the Inferno Friendship Society, who I think they're officially on hiatus.
Can you say that again so that we can catch it?
Absolutely. The World Inferno Friendship Society.
Friendship Society.
Correct. Friendship Society. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I guess they still technically exist. Unfortunately, they lost their lead singer. He passed away about maybe 2 years ago. I'd have to check. And they were very culty. They had a very, very intense scene and very intense following, and people would follow them around the country, kind of like the Grateful Dead, but a little more ragtag and strange looking. The genre was cabaret punk, so that's as strange as it sounds. They had a whole mythology behind them, and certain other bands have the same thing going on. And one thing that struck me later when I started deciding, I have to figure out how to reconcile my culture. I don't want to stop being a Jew. I don't want to stop being Jewish. I haven't really been very Jew or Jewish for quite some time. This is in my early 30s. How do I deal with that? And how do I deal with the competing spiritual need in my head, as odd as it may sound, because I have a competing spiritual need, or at least so I thought, of atheist agnosticism.
You have a
Yeah,
competing spiritual need. So let me just repeat that.
that's how I thought.
Between a desire to be part of your culture, which was the Jewish culture,
Correct.
and the need to identify as an atheist agnostic.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So what happened from there?
So I started looking at it, dipping my toe back in. The same childhood rabbi that I mentioned, my wife and I went to Rosh Hashanah, that's the Jewish New Year service at his synagogue. I was in the area and we visited. Got dinner with him and his wife and his kids, who were all my age and full grown at that point, also in their 30s. And I emailed him at one point, and I mentioned, like, what do I do? I'm an atheist agnostic, or I'm starting to figure it out. And he replies, "Nobody knows if there's a God or not." I'm like, "Why did you do that?"
That okay. Just quick
I don't want
interlude.
to say I was mad. But I was a little like, come on, like, why hadn't anybody given me the spoiler? I could have spent so much time and had so much community, especially in my 20s when we're all lost and scared and broke.
Quick interlude, but that reminds me when I was 15 or 16 and my grandfather passed away. And I remember I asked the rabbi, and it might have been a Reform rabbi, which is, how do you explain Reform? It's just one of the different kinds of Judaism in America, I guess. But it might have been a Reform rabbi, which is just a less religious rabbi, but still a rabbi. Anyway, and I wanted to know. It's interesting that after preschool plus 8 years of full time, not 1 day a week, full time Jewish day school, I had never once been taught what happens to you when you die, which is interesting that in a conservative, meaning kind of traditional but not super religious day school, very Jewishly identified day school, they didn't even talk about that. Now, if you get into, the mysticism and the Hasidism, there definitely is a whole tradition in Judaism about that, but not in the Judaism that I grew up in. And so my grandfather passed away, and I said to the rabbi, I said, "Where'd he go? What happened to him?" And the
Well,
rabbi, again, I could be paraphrasing because it was a long time. Did he say, "I don't know"? Exactly what did he say? But the way I remember what he said is, "Oh, Judaism doesn't say," which it does, by the way. But
no, it doesn't. We have the world to come, which is purposely vaguely defined.
yeah,
So
we
so
we
so,
I
so it's
mean,
like something happens. Well, what is it? You'll find out when you die.
and you can go into the Kabbalah and get really deep, but for the most part, that's the answer. It's like, we don't really know. And I
Like
was just like,
something happens, kid. What? What happens?
what?
I'll
And
I'll, tell, I'll tell you when you're older. How old? When you die.
when you die, yeah, exactly. And so,
It's a
anyway,
very
so
long time for now. No, 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 no. Go talk to boys. Like whatever.
that is part of what sent me down into the Kabbalah and the mysticism, because I wanted more answers. But your story of the rabbi saying, "Oh, no one knows that there's a God," reminded me of my story of the rabbi saying, "Oh, we don't know. We don't have anything to say about what happens to you when you die." So it's like, well, then what is this? That's like, what? So please continue. So then what happened from there?
So something that I do hope, and I do hope that I influence with my efforts, is that the doubt that's present in Judaism, and that, in my opinion, has been present in Judaism going all the way back from when Judaism became a thing, is not harped on enough for the modern age of children, um, as much as it should be. Because so many of us, people in their 30s or 40s now, or people in their teens, growing older, etc., in the Jewish culture, um, a lot of us are skeptics, we're atheists, we're agnostics, blah blah blah, whatever. And I feel like that side of Judaism doesn't get talked about enough, probably because you don't want to confuse a 12-year-old, or so people think. But
Mm.
that cat's out of the bag.
So just the fact that, and see if this is what you are meaning, that and I had a conversation. I was at the lake house this weekend with some friends for Shabbat, and there was a lot of Israelis there who weren't religious but who were very Jewish. And I was having a conversation with one of those guys, the Israeli guy, and we were having this conversation that you can be very much a Jew and not be religious. You can be a Jew and not believe in God, but but what he was saying is that a lot of secular Jews, meaning non-religious Jews, feel like, well, if I don't believe in God or if I'm not religious, then I don't have a place here and I'm no longer Jewish and I can't be Jewish. And I think what you're saying is that it's not spoken enough about enough that, hey, no, like you can still belong here and be doubting and be questioning. And in fact, I mean, look at the Talmud. It's like what all these rabbis arguing about everything. Like that's part of what Judaism is actually to question and to explore. And what I mean by personal God is more like it's my personal relationship to my definition of what that is to me, right? So just to clarify on that. So yeah, I had that conversation with him, and this idea that you can still belong and doubt. So then what happened?
Well, I think there's a lot more room in our culture than there is in other cultures. And granted, I'm not an expert on Christianity, for example. I just know the broad strokes and growing up in a Christian majority country and so on. But my understanding is you either believe in X, Y, and Z and you're a Christian, or you don't. You know, whereas in Judaism, it's not like that at all. We
Right.
practice is pretty much like, no, you're a Jew, you're expected to not eat bread on Passover. End of story. If you do, shame on you. Blah blah blah. Roughly speaking. Although in the modern age, people they tend to be more like, oh well, you have to do what's good for you or whatever. Blah blah blah.
It is interesting
But
how secular Jews will often like, oh, they don't care, they're not connected, but then Passover comes along and they're like, I gotta find a Seder.
right. So that's my viewpoint. Is that there are secular Jews out there that want absolutely nothing to do with the culture, although it's undeniable that their grandparents were Jewish, so therefore, according to the Jewish tradition, by birth they're Jews, etc. Um,
Yeah.
but I actually I don't consider myself secular anymore, which really confuses people and it confuses Jews a lot less, especially the more they've studied and the more they're into to go practicing the culture and going to synagogue and so on.
I'm a
Um,
practicing Jewish atheist.
that's literally what I consider myself. I call myself a reformadox.
I love it. Can you?
So I'm like,
Yeah.
no, we must light the candles 18 minutes before sunset, as our tradition dictates. Blah blah blah. Except for these passages about women and so on, which were written during a time when we had barely invented the wheel, or we were working with bronze. We weren't getting to iron yet, or whatever. You get the point that I'm trying to make. And these very archaic passages written about like women a very long time ago that I'm sorry, I think need to be thrown in the garbage can. They're just they're wrong. I mean, it was a different time.
I'm not sure which passages you're referring to, but how I relate to
I
that is,
won't. I won't go down the rabbit hole.
yeah,
But
how I relate
well,
to that is that there's some things that can evolve, but overall, there's the foundation of a beautiful tradition.
right, and I don't want to go into specifics too because things can get taken out of context, especially in
Yeah,
a podcast and
sure.
looked at and so on. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
with Judaism especially, it really harps on like, no, there's a context for everything. Blah blah blah. There's commentary for everything. Blah blah
And there's
blah.
mysticism for most things too, although there are many different
Correct.
sects in Judaism, and not all of them really have any, some of them don't have anything to do with the mysticism, but
Well, I
I,
view the mysticism as commentary as well, and there's absolutely
right.
nothing wrong with it. It's
And
just
even
another layer of
for,
commentary. And being an atheist agnostic Jew is another layer of commentary. But it's
yeah.
all Judaism, and that's the important part.
So then something I wanted to ask you is like, if, so then what is it to be a Jew? What is Judaism? If you can be Jewish but not religious, and you could be very observant and believe in a personal God, like a person who's relating to you, and be Jewish, or you could believe in God as the universe and be Jewish, or you could believe in no God and be Jewish, then is it a religion? What is it?
No,
Is it a culture? Because there's Eastern European Jews, and there's Jews from you know Middle Eastern Jews, and there's Sephardic Jews, and they have different cultures. So then, what is it to be a Jew?
correct. Yeah, and we all argue over whether or not we're allowed to eat corn and rice and beans on Passover. Yeah, it gets complicated, folks.
Yeah, because it's cultural, right? It's like some of us don't eat kitniyot, meaning beans and rice and stuff, on Passover, depending where our culture came from. Some of us do, but we've been in exile from our homeland, for some 2,000 years now.
Yep,
And so different customs have developed. And yet
correct.
there's something that, but we're still here. And I think it might be part of why even the atheist Jews who aren't religious still hold to some of the customs, because it's very special to get to belong to something so ancient and in a way so uniting.
Oh
And
yeah.
the reason that it still exists is because you still light the candles 18 minutes before Shabbos. You have to hold on to something or it will disappear.
It's funny you used Shabbos, which is fine. I think we both come from Ashkenazi, meaning
Yeah.
Eastern European or Central European Jewish
And I
roots.
hang out with Ashkenazi rabbis, so
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I keep my inclination is to say Good Shabbos, which is the Yiddish way of saying it, versus
Right,
Shabbat Shalom, which would be the Hebrew way of saying it.
right.
The first couple years of my life, when I went to the Jewish day school during the day, it was like very '90s, very it wasn't secular because we would do prayers and so on, but it was like very very like let's be universal, like, and then they're like, no, don't say Good Shabbos. We have Israel. We speak Hebrew now. We don't do Yiddish. Blah 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 blah. Like say Shabbat Shalom. So it's funny, like when you're saying, and we're talking about like the different cultures. Like in my head,
Yeah.
like I'm like, oh no, don't say Good Shabbos. We're all together in Israel now. You have to say Shabbat Shalom. You can't
Well,
speak Yiddish anymore.
and it is interesting, like modern Hebrew is a revived language. It was not
Right.
spoken at all until I'm not sure what year it was revived, maybe you know, but pretty
Late
recently. And
1800s. Yeah,
when?
late 1800s. As a spoken language, it was revived in the late 1800s. Before that, it was just a written and liturgical language. But yeah, I can't remember where we were going. We always go in a bunch of different directions, which is usually how a Friday night
Well,
Shabbat
just
dinner.
yeah, but just to, I think what I was asking you is differentiate. I was specifically saying, what is it to be a Jew? But I think we can broaden
Ah,
that, or maybe
yeah,
not. I'm not sure because we're talking about Jewish culture. But really, it's like, what is it to be a culture, a lineage,
it's a
a
tribe.
religion,
It's a
a
tribe.
tribe? It's a
It's a
tribe.
tribe.
That's why I
It's
say
really
tribe.
that simple, and that's an example that a lot of people can relate to. It's a tribe.
Yeah,
We have tribal beliefs, and so on, which you may completely buy into and think that that defines the universe. You might think like, well, I have to hold things up to scientific, mathematical scrutiny, blah blah blah. But like, you still have it in your heart. And I'm going to loop this back a little bit to the band that was mentioned, the World Inferno Friendship Society, where we had all these fanatical mythology and so on, and everybody knew that it's not real. Like we're pretending, like we don't
hmm.
on Halloween for the big pinnacle concert every year called Hollow Mass, when the singers going on about like, do you believe in the great pumpkin? Blah, like, and everyone's like, yeah, and
Great pumpkin.
right from Charlie Brown fame, but then it was adopted as part of like this mythology that wasn't very defined, but it also would appear in the band's artwork, and you just sort of kind of got the feeling without getting into the details, and it's like, if I can do all that with this cabaret punk band in Brooklyn, why the heck can't I do that with my own culture?
Hmm.
And this is the realization that I had in my 30s, and I found out, according to the Jerusalem Post, there's a word for this, fictionalism, where you kind of like, I don't know if all this stuff is real or not, but I buy into the feeling.
Mm,
I buy into the culture behind it. There's social, personal benefits to participating in the culture, et cetera, doing X, Y, and Z, and blah blah blah.
right.
And that's when I realized, I'm like, yeah, of course I can. If I can do this, with this silly, in other silly little ways, why can't I do this with a 3,000 to 4,000 year old culture that's the worst trials in
Yeah.
history?
And
And the answer is I can, and here we are.
and here we are. Yeah. And I think there really is something to being able to say, okay, there's religions, and then there's a person's personal relationship to that which we call God. And I think people want the sense of tribe and the sense of belonging. And,
Mhm.
I can't speak for other people, but I think a lot of people go towards religion because there is at least a fabric that holds it together, and people feel the sense of, okay, well, I belong to something. And my hope is from this conversation to show that we could still be a part of different cultures from other people, different religions from other people, and in some cases our beliefs are drastically different, But in some cases, our beliefs might not be drastically different, and that one person in any given religion or culture will likely have beliefs that are different from other people in that same religion or culture, and that there's room for exploration, and that regardless of the tribe from which you hail, or the part of the world from which you come, or the language that your ancestors spoke, one of the many things that unites us all as human beings is this yearning to feel connected and to feel belonging.
Yeah, I agree with that. So the time where, if we're getting into feelings, the time where I feel closely connected to God, or however you want to put it, I realize for me it doesn't come out in nature. I feel very connected to nature in that moment. I feel, I love to hike and camp and so on. Um, for me, it comes through people.
Hmm.
It comes through when there's the gathering of people. There's a feeling of connectedness, etc. That's when I feel this presence of something bigger than myself.
Hmm.
That is where I find what people would call God, and that's fine. I mean, other people they'll find it in nature. Other people will find it wherever. Um, but that's where I find it, and especially when people step outside of themselves to do something for others, which there might be an evolutionary biology explanation there that compassion isn't built in innate trait because it increases the fitness of your species for evolutionary selection. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole different class. But there's a part of me that believes there's more than that, because right now with overpopulation and competition and so on, it's probably not in people's best interest to help each other because there's too many people. And so as strange as that sounds, like maybe we don't have that built into our genes yet. That could be a thing. But it just the logical self-preserving choice should be to let somebody die in a car crash because that's one less person competing for resources with you. So then why the heck do we find people that pull people out of this and run into car crashes and war zones, and or healthcare workers that show up to work when we're like, oh my god, is this a flu? Is this a science fiction movie? What's going on here? You know what I mean? Is this the end of the world? That's why I got fat, because I was quite skinny before the pandemic. I'm like, hey, if the world is ending, I'm gonna start eating tacos. I live in Central Texas, and that's
Might
how it
as
is.
well live up. Yeah,
You
seize the
know,
day.
I'm gonna eat ice cream. If the world is ending, I don't want to die on a keto diet. Don't want to do it. So
I
it's the fact that like people reach out of themselves, like I'm like that means something.
yeah.
That's meaningful, and no, there's no scientific proof or mathematical proof for it. It's a
But
feeling
even
that
just this belief, I really appreciate that observation, because, what we focus on is what we end up noticing more, right? And we get to create, so to speak, the world that we live in, because we get to decide what we're going to focus on and what perspective we want to have about a given situation. The situation we may not have had control over, but as we start to focus on certain things, we start to, you focus on people's compassion and acts of kindness, we start to notice more compassion and acts of kindness, right? We
yeah.
start to, and the opposite is true too. And so I feel like in the media and in mass culture of the movie industry, and just everything that we get inundated with, from the mainstream media, has us focusing on the movies where it's dog eat dog out there, um and oh, humans are just, it has this narrative that we're essentially flawed and violent and want to kill each other. And what I hear you saying is actually, like, I'm noticing this continuous thread that at the end of the day, when it really comes down to it, we want to help each other, and that there's a core thing in a human being that is compassionate, and that cares about their fellow man. And I think that is a really beautiful perspective. And I think if we can go about, just today as people are listening and just like notice and start to look for a stranger that smiles, and someone, and because it's easy to find someone that cuts us off in traffic, it's easy to find the negative, but it's like we can notice that too, that there's this underlying core of compassion that even if people are hurt and it's buried in there, it's in there.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting case where my skeptical, rationalist, 21st century atheistic viewpoint actually backs up the religious feelings,
Interesting.
which is interesting. Yeah, so the case for compassion, it's not up for debate. I took the evolutionary biology class in college. It's there. It's present in observations in squirrels. It increases the likelihood that your species will survive versus others. And obviously, it's not 100%. It's not universal, because people still do terrible things, and they, murder each other.
But I think there's something to hurt people, like.
Right. What I was getting at though is like this is something where I think because I have that more of that mindset, I can very comfortably lean on it and be like, no, it is in the science. It's okay.
Interesting.
I can believe in it.
Yeah.
How can you deny the data? Like observation and countless papers to the point where it's in textbooks and taught to undergrads, is that compassion is a genetic force, or it's there, it's real.
Well, and there's a balance in something that we've gotten perhaps out of touch with, is where is that balance between compassion and boundary? And that's in the mysticism too, is this study of compassion and boundary. And something I think is beautiful is
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, so in the Kabbalah, it's chesed and gevura, which is another conversation, but it's compassion and boundary. And where is the balance of compassion and boundary? And I remember, I was talking to a bird expert who was talking about how, birds will defend their territory. And someone was using that as an example of how there's just so much violence in nature, because look at these birds and they're always fighting and they're defending their territory. And it's like, well, actually, they're not going out to kill each other. In this case, I mean, there's an example for everything in nature, right? But in this case, they weren't going out to kill each other, but they were defending, and they were defending with strength. And that's both compassion and boundary, because without the boundary,
sure,
there's no home anymore. They have to protect their family by exerting, hey, I'm fierce, I'm strong, this is my boundary. And at the same time, once the boundary is expressed, then that's enough. And then you notice that the birds, every dawn, there's something called the dawn chorus, and they sing together. Every dawn. This is so beautiful. They sing together, and you can hear it when you wake up. And it's all the birds who later in the day are going to go defend their territories against each other. But when they wake up, they're all singing together to the sunrise. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I knew the words chesed meaning loving kindness and gevura meaning power, but I didn't know of the discussion between power versus strength. That's an interesting one, because sorry, loving kindness versus power, and that's an interesting one because it's usually presented as loving kindness versus not loving kindness or cruelty.
Right.
It's not a marriage between power and loving kindness. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. We'll talk after the podcast.
Well, I'm going to use this moment. This is a perfect moment for me to plug my book that's coming out this summer.
All right.
And then I have I feel like I want to close with a blessing, because that's what's coming up for me now. But it's a perfect moment for me to plug my book that's coming out this summer, because my book goes really deeply into those different attributes. and the Kabbalistic tree of life, and it's called Four World Alchemy: Discovering Your Inner Magic Through Kabbalah, and the Chesed and Gevura and the other Sfirot, I go way into depth. Really not only about them from like an intellectual perspective, but from a perspective of like, how do these different attributes relate to me personally? How can I dive deeper into my personal exploration with these attributes to heal and learn and grow? And so I will definitely let you know when that comes out. It'll come out this summer, and it comes with a workbook, and it comes with a card deck. And for people who are listening that are interested in that, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, shifrabloom.com, and then you will definitely get notified. So I just wanted to plug that and share that with you and others. Have I showed you my card deck yet?
I think so, but there was wine and carbs involved, so my memory.
Yeah, so we'll have to do it again.
I think there was. I think it was a Friday night Shabbat thing.
Yeah. So I wanna share a blessing, and then I'll see if you have any closing words as well, or anything else to add. But based on everything you were just saying, I wish upon us all that we can see the God in each other. That we can, and what does God mean? Maybe that's not the word that's going to relate to some people. So maybe you have a different way of saying that, but that we can see also the humanness in each other, that we can see whatever that invisible force is that does connect us all. Maybe it's compassion, maybe it's love, however you want to say it. I want to wish upon us all and bless us all that we can find a point of connection between ourselves and our fellow men and women. And that is what I want to share and wish upon us all today.
Excellent.
And
Yeah. So the explain it like I'm five way of put it is in my heart as an atheist agnostic Jew, in my heart God is so real. God is really real. I believe in it, and I believe in it specifically through the lens of the God of Israel, because that's who I am in my culture, and I very strongly hold it. My brain, that's where math and science run the show. And then
you're okay holding this paradox, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it's in my brain, math and science are the landlord. They run the show there. They're the ringleader. In my heart, I very, very strongly believe in God.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and it's in closing, if you're listening to this and you're Jewish or not, that's fine. But especially if you're Jewish, because that's the target, audience that I'm trying to reach and connect and help out. And you're struggling to, like, how do I connect with my culture, even though I'm very rationalist, blah, 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 whatever. Go to atheistagnosticjews.com and sign up for our mailing list. So right now we are just a mailing list. I have plans. We may go back to Clubhouse and do more Torah reading and so on. We might go to Discord, but for now, just sign up for our mailing list at atheistagnosticjews.com.
Yeah, I love it. And it's truly just connecting and having conversations with people, as far as I know, what you're doing, and it's really special. So, all right, well, I think we could go so much deeper. I mean, even just what you just said, I'm like, oh, the paradox of the conversation of God held so much. And I think even in my own definition of God, it's like, to really comprehend God, one has to be able to hold things that are opposites and simultaneously true. And so that's a mind warp, and perhaps we'll leave it at that.
But it could be your place as a human being to not completely wrap your mind around it.
Yeah, it could be
That's
just
okay.
to be okay with.
You're working in 3 dimensions with a human brain, and maybe the reality does not make a whole lot of sense. Which, again, you can find stuff in science that just,
Yeah,
maybe we will have a human readable way to look at it. But like right now, like, okay, in the
Okay.
center of a black hole, which is at the center of every universe, time and space collapse into an infinitely small point that's infinitely or whatever. I'm not a physicist. That doesn't make any freaking sense.
That makes
No, it
sense.
doesn't make any sense. And maybe we'll
No.
have, like I said, a human readable version of someday. But like right now, we're like, nope. These are the characteristics. Blah blah blah. This is how the math works out. Okay, well, we can work with that.
Mhm.
But as far as like something you can like touch or perceive, like an apple, like no, we don't have that. I personally don't think we ever will.
Mhm.
So.
Well, thank you, Leif, for sharing your story. I love these conversations. I get to add a little bits and pieces of my own, but of my own, descriptions of God and story in these conversations, but really it's so fun for me to get to hear someone else's perspective and then see, did I understand that? Is this what this person means? And try and grasp other ways of knowing and other ways of seeing the world. And I really appreciate the perspective that you have. I hope that your story reaches all of the people that are looking to, connect to this particular culture, especially, but also feel resonant with this logical atheist perspective. I think that resonates with a lot of people in the Western world. So, do you have, if that's it, then I will wrap up our call.
I think that's a
Uh,
great place to call a stop. And thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for listening. This is the What is God podcast. I'm Shiva Bloom, your hostess. Please leave us a review on the podcast, subscribe to it so you don't miss one. On this podcast, I ask people from all walks of life to enter their answer to the question, what and where is God and what does it have to do with me? Until next time.